We've got a stellar group here that's going to carry us to happy hour. I'll give a brief introduction on the various speakers and then let them have their time at the podium. First up is Joni Carswell, who is the president and CEO of Texas by Nature. We've had a couple plugs for this organization in previous presentations, but again, you really do need to look at what this organization is about, especially if you're coming from the corporate side of things. Joni is kind of our unique talent is coming from corporate America and really bridging the gap between corporate and business and natural resource conservation. So looking forward to hearing from her. Our second speaker will be Russell Martin. Russell is a diversity biologist based out of Canyon, Texas. He is well-traveled and one of the most well-rounded biologists that I know. He's spent time in Alpine, where we work closely together on some different projects. He's also spent some time here in Midland, so he knows this area well. And then lastly is Billy Tarrant, who needs no introduction. But Billy is our Associate Director of Stewardship Services, and he is really the tip of the spear when it comes to our Center for Land Stewardship and Stakeholder Engagement. We stole him from Texas Parks and Wildlife, where he worked as a regulatory biologist, district leader, and regional director over a 23-year career with Texas Parks and Wildlife. So again, we're talking about partnerships and possibilities, and I'll turn this over to Joni.
All right. Excellent. Well, again, thank you, Louis, and thank you for having all of us here today. This has been wonderful conversation throughout the day and just a great opportunity to hear from all of the stakeholders and a real testament to what you've done with Respect Big Bend and then with the center moving forward. So thank you. I just wanted to take a minute or two and talk a little bit about Texan by Nature and who we are. For those of you who aren't familiar with us yet, and then give a couple of examples of partnerships. Some of them are not as relevant to West Texas, but I find that when you start looking to other industries or other regions, sometimes it sparks creativity for something that you can do here in your own region. So I'm going to share a couple of those examples, and then just a couple of thoughts from what we've heard throughout the day as possibilities for us to work together moving forward. So again, I am Texan by Nature, and we are a conservation nonprofit, and we were founded in 2011, so just over 10 years old. And I won't go into these data points because you've heard most of them today. Really, the data points point to Texas is awesome. We lead in natural resources, we lead in industry, we lead in people, and there are a lot of people moving here because of that, which creates concerns, but also creates opportunities. And so Texan by Nature sits right in the middle of those opportunities. We exist to advance conservation. We consider ourselves an accelerator for conservation and a strategic resource for industry. We partner with 110 and growing conservation NGOs across the state of Texas, and we have listening sessions, we provide resources, we work with these conservation groups to advance their projects all over the state of Texas, rural and urban. And a lot of the folks who have talked today have been involved in our Conservation Wrangler program, which was it's an accelerator. Basically, you apply, and if you're selected for your project, we work with you over the course of 18 months and provide the resources you need to accelerate your project. And so why do we seek to advance conservation by bringing groups together? As I mentioned, we were founded in 2011. We were founded by former First Lady Laura Bush. And when we looked out at what was happening in conservation in Texas, we didn't want to step on anybody's toes. There are amazing resources across the state, brilliant people working on so many different issues, and it didn't make sense to start another organization that was competing with the work that was already being done. So Texan by Nature really was started to lift up that work, accelerate that work. And as we looked at where the gaps were, we saw that there are all these players who care about Texas, they care about our natural resources, but they're coming at it from slightly different ways. So we work to sit in the center of conservation, community, and corporate entities, and really connect the strengths that each of these groups have. Because from industry, we hear that we need validated projects. We want to fund these projects for our ESG strategy. We want to work locally. We want to give back to where our workforce is, but we don't know maybe who to go and work with. From community, we hear we want to be one of the best places to live. We want a sustaining economy. We want happy, well-educated citizens. And then from conservation groups, we hear that we need funding, we need expertise on maybe the business and the marketing side, we need help on some of these areas where we don't have capacity. And if you bring all these groups together, most often you have a full, ready-to-go project that reaches much higher levels of impact than any one of these groups operating alone. So, with that in mind, a couple of examples you may or may not be aware of folks who are working with local community, working with conservation partners. You heard from Faye earlier talking about her work with the McDonald Observatory. I usually actually use that as one of the best in class examples. You heard from Jesse talking about the work that ConocoPhillips has done with so many of the partners across the state of Texas, particularly here in the Permian. But one that is more adjacent to the energy industry is actually Cemex. And they're interesting in that they are trying to revamp their portfolio, and in the last couple of years introduced a new product called Vertua, which is a carbon sequestering product, so that when development is occurring and they're laying concrete, it's different than the traditional concrete. And then they also actually own a massive amount of land on the border of Texas and Mexico, the El Carmen Land Preserve, and they work with quite a few different conservation groups, Bighorn sheep, quails forever, pheasants forever, and they actually hired a couple of Texas Parks and Wildlife biologists to manage that land and have done an amazing job delivering landowner resources and guides and best practices for us to follow. So an interesting example of them not necessarily operating where they own that big amount of land, but showing a passion for more nationally the countries that they are selling into and trying to offset the other work that they do around the world. Another kind of off example is from transportation, BNSF Railway and Friends of RGV Reef. If you guys are unfamiliar, trawling in the Gulf of Mexico really reduced a lot of the reef for redfish to nothing. And the redfish populations were dwindling. And there were two community members, a pair of brothers, they're accountants by trade, and they got tired of not getting any bites when they went out to fish for redfish. And they're like, okay, what do we do? Faye talked earlier about bring a solution. Their solution was let's fix this reef. Let's do something about it. And so they actually ended up getting money from Enbridge and then talked with BNSF, who donated tons of material, so 60,000 used railroad ties. And they sunk those and created a 1 square mile reef. And now you have a thriving juvenile redfish population. They've seen the Kemp's Ridley turtle come back, and they're now embarking on research, and this was something that Jesse mentioned earlier, research to show the carbon benefits of this reef work as well. HEB has come to the table and put money in, and they're actually working with them to source some of their food products from that area as well. So a big project where something that would have gone to a landfill or been an eyesore is actually being used to fix another area of concern off the coast of Texas. And then one more closer to home. We're actually working with both EOG Resources and ConocoPhillips. Jesse mentioned earlier some of the native seed work that they're doing. We've been working with EOG Resources since 2018, it started as monarch work, now it's broadened to pollinator work, but we've been working with the seed industry, landowners, and then the oil and gas industry, saying what if, when we reduced pad sites and rights of way, if we made those food plots for monarchs and then ultimately for all pollinators, could we solve some of the pollinator issues that we're seeing? And in working with all of those groups, we've been able to find seed mixes that are significantly lower in price than they were a couple of years ago, but we didn't fully close the gap to make it cost neutral or even cost beneficial for all oil and gas companies. So now we're looking at the benefits that we could potentially claim in biodiversity, carbon, water quantity, and water quality. So the stacked ecosystem benefits of this work. And EOG and ConocoPhillips have been on the front end with their biologists asking great questions at the front end and working with landowners to get them to sign up for this program. And then also in sharing data and creating a data set that the entire industry can use moving forward to show the benefit of the work that you guys have been doing for many, many years. And then another example from renewable energy. So Lightsource BP has started solar work here in Texas, and they're doing pollinator habitat at their installation, but they're also doing grazing. They're putting significant investment into their new installations. And one of the things that's exciting about this is the planning piece that we talked about earlier. It's planned from the start, so it's not a retrofit. They're planning from the start to have habitat, to have grazing, to operate and steward the land in a way that's beneficial for the long term, while at the same time taking energy from the solar installations as well. So exciting opportunities as solar and wind grow in the West Texas area to learn from some of the best practices that people are trying out around the world right now. So additional examples, I won't go into details on these, but they're all over. If you'd like to be inspired by industry and conservation working together, on our website under certification, you can find case studies and examples of a lot of these projects, whether it's oyster shell recycling, reef building, grassland restoration, playa restoration, which is closer to home. There are best practices, guides, and examples for all of these types of projects that are taking place across the state of Texas. And more importantly, as we look at these examples, I always like to focus on action. So what can we do? These are great, but what are the next steps? And I won't go into detail. You guys can read these. A lot of these things have been voiced today. Come with a solution. Seek to understand before you start shouting and trying to be understood. But at the end there, I don't want to steal Billy's thunder. He's going to go into more detail on this, I believe. But the new center, there's a big opportunity to learn from examples and work with the Center for, is it Land Stewardship and Stakeholder Engagement? Did I get it right? Yes. So to work with that center moving forward on big landscape scale projects, but at the ranch level. I loved that ranch level question earlier. And as far as possibilities go, we're at this unique point in time where ESG is important. I forget which speaker it was earlier that talked about the massive increase in investment in ESG. But you can even look at the public companies and what they're talking about during their earnings calls. And just a year ago, only like 1 in 20 was mentioning ESG when they gave their earnings calls. Now it's 1 in 5. In one short year, 20% of publicly traded companies are talking about ESG every time that they're giving their earnings. So big opportunity to capitalize on the focus around ESG and the needs that we have for land stewardship and for natural resource conservation. I think it's an opportunity in Texas to be true energy leaders. I liked what Russell had to say earlier about and I mentioned this at the panel, we've led in every iteration. It's not an energy transition, it's an energy evolution. And we have that opportunity to lead and to show the world what this looks like. Because of the ecosystem diversity that we have, because of the diversity and resources that we have, because of the amount of experts that we have right here at home, it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to pair that with land stewardship and show what it looks like moving forward, whether we're focused on native restoration and habitat for various species while at the same time developing energy, whether it's education for K-12 and working in our local communities. There are big opportunities. And the other possibility is just showing the planning aspect of this, co-location of energy production with where it's being used, planning from the standpoint of not only this is the land that's of less conservation value than others, but what we can also do is plan for the habitat and the land use as we're implementing those installations as well. And then finally, the collaborative research aspect of this. One of the biggest gaps that we continue to hear come with a solution, come with an understanding of where each partner is coming from, whether you're a company going to talk to a landowner, whether you're a conservation group going to talk to landowners and industry, or vice versa. Understand where they're coming from, but really, right now that's hard because there is no data set to go to as far as the benefits of some of this work. There's no standardized way and standardized language that we're all using. And so we have an opportunity to come together through the center to talk about, this is how we are going to create a baseline. This is how we're going to talk about advances and impact. These are the metrics we're going to use. These are the tools that we're all going to accept and use together. And there's huge opportunity to do that for the rest of the United States and the world, because the entire world is dealing with that lack of tools, standard data, et cetera. So big possibilities in front of us, amazing examples from conservation and the corporate realm of work that we can build upon. And I think it's an exciting time. So again, thank you for letting me kick this panel off.
All right, howdy. I'm Russell Martin, and I'll be presenting on behalf of John Solofsky and the TPWD leadership team. I'm going to apologize in advance. I was asked to give this presentation at the last minute by the leadership team. They had some urgent business they had to attend to today, and so I'm going to end up giving you all the presentation up there, but I'll be reading from my notes quite a bit, so I apologize for not making eye contact ahead of time. Also going to cover a lot of material, so I'll get moving. So a little bit about the department, and then I'm going to give a few examples and then talk about some possibilities. So the Texas Parks and Wildlife's mission is to conserve the natural resources of Texas for present and future generations. Our department has 3,000 employees across 12 divisions, including 3 natural resource divisions, the inland fisheries, coastal fisheries, and wildlife divisions. And between those 3 divisions, we have 700 employees. The operating budget for those 3 divisions is about $90 million a year, but that $90 million helps generate and facilitate the $14.4 billion outdoor recreational economic activity that happens every year in Texas. We use our budgets to manage and conserve the 190,000 miles of streams and rivers in the state, the 3,000 miles of coastline, and the 171 million acres of habitat that's mostly under private ownership. We do this by providing technical guidance, monitoring populations, conducting public outreach, and funding research. So it's no secret, and it's been talked about today, that the national or global, national, and state population growth is driving increased energy demand. This creates challenges for conservation or opportunities for collaboration, depending on how you want to look at it. As you can see from the map on the left, the Central Great Plains, which is home to the Permian Basin, is home to a significant amount of our country's energy production. The map shows oil and gas in red and wind energy in blue. When energy is cited with natural resource conservation in mind, energy development and wildlife can share and prosper across this magnificent landscape. When energy is cited poorly, as you can see on the example on the right, the impacts to wildlife and natural resources can be significant. The diagram shows a wind farm that went in Kansas in 2016 and ultimately extirpated and displaced lesser prairie-chicken leks from an area where they had occurred for hundreds of years. At the department, we like to look at this as opportunities for partnership and conservation. It's imperative that we identify and seize these opportunities if we want to prevent the need for regulatory intervention from laws such as the Endangered Species Act. Collaborative planning efforts such as Respect Big Bend and the Lesser Prairie-Chicken Range-Wide Plan are key to proactive conservation. Resource agencies like Parks and Wildlife and BRI and the organizations that are here today, we should be striving to plan and share our plans and the information that we have with industry. In turn, our industry partners should do their best to avoid development in the highest priority areas, and they should hopefully voluntarily minimize and offset their impacts when avoidance isn't possible in order to prevent the need for regulatory intervention down the road. So I'm going to go over 3 examples with you. This first one I'm going to run through pretty quick, but these are all examples of what we call win-win scenarios for conservation and industry. The Texas Playa Conservation Initiative was created in 2015. It's a really simple program designed to backfill tailwater pits in playas to restore their hydrologic function. And we're doing it across the whole panhandle at this point, the whole panhandle. These playas are important habitat for migratory waterfowl that overwinter in the panhandle, but they're also the primary source of recharge for the Ogallala Aquifer that fuels one of the largest agricultural economies in the world that is centered in the Texas panhandle. As you can see, this is a partnership-driven program, and it's a win-win for wildlife and the communities of the High Plains. In partnership with the oil and gas industry, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation created the Pecos Watershed Conservation Initiative in 2017. The goal of this program, proactive conservation program, is to benefit focal wildlife species and the overall ecosystem health of the habitat along the Pecos River and the associated grassland habitats along the Rio Grande. The program has delivered $6.49 million across 34 projects since its inception. With over $1 million in 8 projects, private landowners and Parks and Wildlife biologists and Rio Grande Joint Venture have restored over 17,000 acres of Chihuahuan desert grasslands, benefiting over 24 desert grassland species of greatest conservation need, such as the Pronghorn, Sprague's pipit, and Massasauga. All of these desert grassland specialists have experienced significant population declines in recent decades and are on a trajectory for regulatory intervention. However, proactive programs like this one will hopefully help us avoid the need for that intervention. Our Inland Fisheries Division has completed 8 projects restoring or improving 6.5 miles of streams and 158 acres of upland habitat adjacent to streams, benefiting aquatic and riparian species of greatest conservation need, such as the Pecos pupfish, Pecos gambusia, Rio Grande cooter, Texas hornshell, yellow-billed cuckoo, and many more. Several of these species are already federally listed. However, there are dozens more that are on a trajectory for regulatory intervention as well. In this example, Inland Fisheries partnered with a private landowner to install beaver dam analogs to reduce in-stream water velocity. These in-stream structures help reduce water velocity to decrease erosion, increase infiltration rates, which also recharges the local riparian aquifer, and it provides habitat for these aquatic and riparian SGCN species that I mentioned. Again, this is a partnership-driven program that is finding win-win outcomes for conservation and our economy. Several of the major oil and gas companies operating in the Permian Basin have contributed significant investments into this program. Those investments are being matched with federal funding from organizations like NRCS and Fish and Wildlife Service. The funds are then leveraged with additional dollars from the grant recipients that they bring to the table. The conservation delivery partners from this program include dozens of agency, university, and nonprofit organizations, including Texas Parks and Wildlife, New Mexico Game and Fish, Parks and Wildlife Foundation, Rio Grande Joint Venture, Borderlands Research Institute, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, TNC Texas, and multiple soil and water conservation districts. These groups further tap into their extensive networks of partners and landowners to proactively put conservation on the ground in the places where it's most needed. The last example I'm going to talk about is an unprecedented partnership between states and industry to create the Lesser Prairie-Chicken range-wide plan in 2013. The conservation plan established a population goal and mitigation framework to conserve the species and facilitate continued, uninterrupted economic activity across the species range. We definitely learned some very valuable lessons about the importance of good program implementation and administration. However, ultimately, this collaborative effort between conservation and industry resulted in another win-win for conservation and the economy by providing business predictability for landowners and industry, and it should serve as a model for future conservation efforts. The range-wide plan candidate conservation agreement with assurances, which was a partner document to the plan itself, enrolled 111 industry partners covering over 6 million acres across Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Under the CCAA, industry enrollees have responsibly developed over 17,000 acres across the chicken's range since 2014. Approximately 90% of new development is co-located within previously impacted habitat, which is what we call avoidance, and the remaining 10% of development occurred in low-quality habitat, which was a great example of minimization. The enrollment and additional development fees that were used to offset and mitigate the minimal negative impacts by enrolling up to 149,000 acres of prairie chicken habitat into WAFWA's Lesser Prairie Chicken Conservation Program, which has restored nearly 18,000 acres of chicken habitat and improved habitat quality on the remaining 131,000 acres. WAFWA's Chicken Conservation Program has enrolled 2 ranches in Texas that cover nearly 40,000 acres. With WAFWA's support and the funding from this mitigation framework, these ranches have controlled over 5,500 acres of mesquite and improved habitat quality by treating over 8,000 acres of shinnery oak that increase nesting cover and forage production. Also under this plan, the Yoakum Dunes Wildlife Management Area was acquired through a partnership between TNC Texas, the Conservation Fund, WAFWA, and Texas Parks and Wildlife. The partnership utilized private funds donated by Concho Resources to leverage Pittman-Robertson funding 3-to-1 to conserve over 15,000 acres of prime prairie chicken habitat in the Shinnery Oak ecoregion of Texas. Today, Yoakum Dunes WMA is the premier research and demonstration site for prairie chickens in Texas. And it's hard to see, but that's the list of 111 organizations that enrolled in the program. And it's the who's who of energy programs and producers here in the Permian Basin. TPWD and our partners also have the ability to identify and fund strategic research projects to provide the best available science required to inform conservation policy. With funding from TPWD and Fish and Wildlife Service, Texas A&M conducted a genetic analysis of the western Massasauga, a rare rattlesnake from the Central Great Plains and Desert Southwest. The study showed that the 2 previously identified subspecies were actually just one subspecies. That led to the Center for Biological Diversity withdrawing their petition to have the species listed under the Endangered Species Act. Another example of strategic research was a project funded by the Comptroller's Office to document the current distribution of the Rio Grande cooter. That research was paramount to the service's recent decision to not list the species. Texas Parks and Wildlife and our partners are always looking for opportunities to collaborate with industry to find win-win opportunities for conservation and our economy. In addition to participating in the previously discussed examples, there are additional upcoming opportunities for industry and conservation to partner, like the new Southern Great Plains grassland program that NFWF just started. and recently selected a joint proposal from Pheasants Forever and TPWD to restore over 3,000 acres of grassland habitat in the Texas Panhandle. There's endless opportunities for partnership that can result in win-win outcomes for our wildlife and our economy. And we're always looking for new partnerships and new programs. We have lots of great staff and a network of partners, landowners, that we can always tap into and try to bring new, innovative ways to achieve win-win outcomes for conservation of the economy. That's it.
When I planned this, I didn't realize I was going to be in between y'all and happy hour, so I'll try to do my best. I do want to mention on a side note, I've had a lot of folks come up and ask for some more information. We will be sending out a questionnaire to all of you, like I mentioned earlier, but also try to get some information, maybe some contact information that would be important for y'all to make some contacts you didn't quite get to make here today. But right now, I'm excited to give you a quick presentation on mainly BRI, Borderlands Research Institute. For those that don't know, it's kind of the last minute here. Obviously, we're being supported by the Mitchell Foundation, and our partners are kind of stand up this Center for Land Stewardship and Stakeholder Engagement, which we affectionately call CLSSE, C-L-S-S-E. I'm not sure that describes the staff and myself that work there, but that's our acronym, and we're sticking with it. Now? Cool. So quickly, something about BRI, Borderlands Research Institute. Understanding the need for information and the value of natural resource conservation, Sul Ross State University created the Borderlands Research Institute for Natural Resource Management in the spring of 2007. That was really the catalyst of the moderator dude on here at the end, Dr. Lewis Harvison. It was his vision, and he followed through on that, and it has been a very successful venture housed within the Natural Resource Program there at Sul Ross. The four-pronged approach to research is obviously important at Sul Ross. We do a lot of research. I'm going to talk about a little bit more about that in a second. But the focus of those four silos there are primarily game bird, conservation biology, the non-game aspect of it, as well as big game and habitat. Education and outreach. This is something that's very important to Dr. Harvison, and he's done a great job putting that together. These are some of the publications that we put out. I hope some of you are getting these publications, or we have an email publication that goes out as well as those that are sent out hard copies. We have a huge distribution list. We touch a lot of folks with the research that we do. Not to mention a lot of our reports that you see there. I wanted to mention a couple of projects that we have ongoing with conservation partners and industry partners that tap right into industry. This first one here is Brooke Bowman's current research for her master's on scaled quail resource selection and survival across a gradient of oil and gas development in the Permian Basin. This is obviously, you heard about this earlier from Jesse. It's a partnership with ConocoPhillips. To look at the impact of development on scaled quail populations. This is another project in Reagan County by Erin O'Connell's also here. This is her master's project looking at remote sensing well pad use. Let me say that again, remote sensing well pads using object-based image analysis. Well, I didn't have the objectives there, but the bottom line is looking from a spatial standpoint at oil pads in Reagan County, where we do have pronghorn population, and the impact of those well pads for habitat selection by pronghorn, utilizing GPS collars. Speaking of GPS collars on pronghorn, we've got a lot of data there. Many of you may have heard in the past about the pronghorn restoration project that we've had in the Trans-Pecos, and It's been an 8-year data set that us partnering with Texas Parks and Wildlife on this restoration effort. We've got over 379 animals that were translocated and had GPS collars. This led to over 500,000 locations. It gives you a pretty good idea of the habitat that pronghorn select, and then we tie that back to those environmental variables that they select for, and utilize that information to come up with a spatial data set that shows where the best corridors for movement are for pronghorn in the Trans-Pecos, where the best habitat is, and how those animals may move on the landscape. And I bring this up because this is one of the data sets you saw earlier from Alex that we utilized as part of the Respect Big Bend effort to incorporate those values. This provides connectivity for wildlife. We did something very similar for bighorn sheep. Same situation, a pretty big data set with our partners at Texas Parks and Wildlife, 172 animals with over 26,000 locations. And then utilize the same those environmental variables that are important for bighorn sheep, incorporated that into a spatially explicit data set that shows occupied or probable range, as well as those connecting areas that bighorn would use for connectivity. Once again, this was incorporated in as one of many of these science-based data sets that BRI provided for the Respect Big Bend effort. These corridors that you mentioned here are very important for wildlife, as you could imagine, and it's really important that those did pop somewhat on that tool that Alex talked about earlier. And of course, as I mentioned, these were incorporated into the West Texas Data Viewer online tool, which we hope to be rolling out here pretty quick. I hope that I'll talk more about that in a minute. It's an ongoing effort. We were proud of it. I think it does have a lot of application for industry, landowners, and community as well. So. Quickly, I want to mention Respect Big Bend. I want to talk a little bit about that. Once again, I think y'all got the message now. As initiated and supported by the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, as an effort to balance, energy development with ecological and social values of the region. Our primary roles, as I mentioned, were twofold. One was to provide sound science, and also to be a local convener. We were the local convener of stakeholders, and that's where I came in with my original position at BRI, and I actually made a pretty big jump in my career to get that done. I felt like it was too important. It was something that I felt like was an innovative. Throughout our careers, we talk about this. Some of those of us that have, like myself and Elazar, were born, graduated high school in 1984. If you look at the conservation folks that have grown up and spent their careers doing this, we've been hearing about the importance of conservation partnerships our entire careers, and really have seen it blossom across the United States and the planet when you do good partnerships. It wasn't always the case, but it seems like it really has taken off, and Russell just mentioned a couple of great ones there as well. So bottom line is, we pulled together the Stakeholder Advisory Group, which was 14 local landowners, community residents, and leaders, conservation organization employees, and industry representatives, and these folks toiled. Luckily, we got started prior to COVID, so we had a lot of in-person meetings, and we followed up with the Zoom meetings afterwards. We're talking like 14 meetings, anywhere from 2 to 3 hours a piece, to come up with what we've come up with. I hope before y'all leave that y'all stop by the Respect Big Bend desk there and the table and pick up one of those. We've got the 2 reports. They're both available online. One is a short report that was primarily constructed by the Stakeholder Advisory Group, and the other one is a longer, more technical report. We didn't bring the technical report. We don't have as many of those available. We do have quite a few of the shorter reports, and I think they give a real good synopsis of the effort. So once again, they met 14 times. You've seen these values displayed before. I, like Lewis, very proud of these values. I've never seen them actually put down what we really appreciate about that country and why we like living there and why people like visiting there. Once again, there was no prioritized values. However, ranching heritage and the large intact landscapes across much of the Trans-Pecos region were a umbrella value, if you will, that really encompassed all those. That's what provides our clean water, our clean air, our dark skies, good wildlife habitat. A lot of that is because of the unimpacted nature of these large working ranches. Another result of the Respect Big Bend effort, especially with what the Stakeholder Advisory Group put together, was they've made 4 recommendations. Can y'all read that? Because I can't hardly read it. So obtain stakeholder input was the first one. What they're saying there was that this was a worthwhile effort. It was one of the most enjoyable, rewarding things I've ever been involved with, to watch 2 people that we hand-selected, to be honest with you, because we felt like they were the people that could come to the table, commit the time, and really make a difference. And you get 2 people on 2 different political sides of the spectrum come to a strong agreement about things they value. It was just that process itself, that discussion, many felt like was one of the most important things they could have done. But the entire process has led to us where we are now, trying to provide resources and opportunities for landowners and others and industry to all get together and have these conversations. It's worthwhile. It should be replicated. And I know that the Mitchell Foundation and others are thinking about that now. The second one was establish a center. The Center for Land Stewardship and Stakeholder Engagement. That was the culmination of this effort. And the Stakeholder Advisory Group felt strongly about this, not only because they saw tangible, benefits individually from it, but the fact that you could actually have some entity that could provide resources and keep this plan alive, right? This is not something that was done, it's stuck on a shelf, it gathers dust. Everybody in here has been through a strategic planning process. I think I've been through 2 or 3 in my career. Know what that works like. You typically do your planning, you set it up on the shelf, and you come back 5 years, dust it off, and see if you've accidentally met the goals you put in there. This is something that we want to be tangible, alive, and continue being dynamic with. It provided the house, if you will, for the effort. Support programs that encourage conservation from a voluntary standpoint. Bottom line is, I think a lot of us have seen this in our careers, and I'm going to make a statement here, and I don't want to get in trouble, but I do believe Russell just hit on it perfectly. When you're working with private landowners on a private land state and you want to impact conservation, what you do is you find where your goals align and you find the funding to incentivize conservation that benefits them from their goals and also affects wildlife habitat and populations. It's voluntary, incentive-based conservation where you provide a cost share to those properties, opportunity for them to partner up. And that can be through NRCS, a Natural Resource Conservation Service. It can be through Partners for Habitat with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And obviously the NFWF program, which is a very similar program. It's all about cost share, and the bottom line is voluntary incentive-based conservation works. Heavy-handed government regulation doesn't. And that's the key. It works big time. So they wanted to put that out front and center as well, because everybody there understood that it does work. And finally, the last one is to restore the country that's already been disturbed, especially those areas of high conservation value that, the opportunities are there for restoration. It is a daunting task, as you heard earlier today, about from a reseeding standpoint and how much it would take to do all of it to be restored. I didn't interject in that conversation, but I do feel like our planning tool has offered us the opportunity to prioritize areas for restoration. Some of those places that have maybe no longer have production, but could really be outstanding from a conservation standpoint if they were restored, and I hope that we can continue walking down that road and making that happen. Should have had that already. Sorry, those are the reports. I'm not going to read all this, but the Center for Land Stewardship and Community Engagement. Oh, it changed names, and I didn't change it on the slide. We changed that at the last second. Oh, really? It says right there the goal of Classy, so at least I had the acronym right. I will tell you that it's to facilitate effective conservation in far west Texas. This provides technical resources for landowners, energy developers, community members, and conservation partners. Specifically, that is providing science-based guidance. I'm going to read this, I got to read it. To relevant stakeholders, enabling them to make informed decisions about minimizing developmental impacts while implementing mitigation and restoration activities. offers resources and technical guidance to area landowners and land managers to assist them in their conservation and management goals. We just talked about some of those opportunities. Serves as a conservation liaison and convener for principal conservation partners in order to maximize the effectiveness of various conservation initiatives in the region. We've got a lot going on out there right now. And it gets confusing to us sometimes. I know it gets confusing to landowners because of all the partners that are working to work with their landowner partners to get some good conservation done. So we're trying to maximize those efforts, simplify it, and then when we have the opportunity to collaborate and work together for a greater good, we want to make that happen. So it is a landing spot for application portal. We just went through our first one at BRI with our partners for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Program. Our partners at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife have a fantastic program. It's incentive-based conservation, like I mentioned a while ago. We had to go through an application process with ranking and did that. We have an amazing amount of response to that. You know, over 90-something applications, totaling an estimated 500,000 acres of landowners that are interested in working with us to get some conservation done. It shows that need, and we've already got our friends at NRCS doing the same work out there through their EQIP program. All of us working for the same goal, you know, to maximize conservation at the same time meeting those landowners' goals, which are usually aligned very well. It's an online resource for conservation partners and landowners to make informed decisions. I mentioned in there, I left this in there, this is a previous slide, helping host a summit, which we're doing today. This is a tangible result of that. We finally have, you know, with the Mitchell Foundation's help, we've stood up the center, and we want to continue to make ourselves available. That's the reason my card's in your packet. If you want to reach out to us at any time, we'd love to engage with you. But I want to be clear, too, I don't just think it's about Classy. I do think it's about this whole conversation, whether it's stakeholder engagement, community assistance, partnering up with industry to make good things happen on the land or within communities that may be impacted by development. It's about finding that fit, right? And so I would encourage y'all, as we leave here today, we have our last social here in a bit, to not only just reach out to us at the Center for Land Stewardship and Stakeholder Engagement, but also reach out to Texan by Nature and Joni and her crew. That's what they do. They make those connections, right? It may not be us that you want to work with. It may be somebody else. There's other conservation partners in the room. I would encourage you to find those resources. We can help you find the resources if you want to reach out to us. But make that connection, not just overselling this center, which I think is very valuable, very important, and we hope will be there for a long time to be a resource, but finding your fit where it may fit you as well if you have an interest in conservation or stakeholder engagement as well. Just briefly about the tool, you know, I'm proud of the work that they did, that our friends at Nature Conservancy put it together. I think Alex did a fantastic job rolling it out. I just want y'all to know it's coming pretty soon. We just need a little more tweaks on it. It will be available online at the BRI website. I threw this in here because I don't think we have shown it today, but these, you know, Respect Big Bend brought us to this point, and obviously we still have a booth that we'll put out on occasion. We've got some materials, but it was a great effort, and these were the partners that all helped us through that effort. And these were the funders. We started with the Mitchell Foundation and the vision of that organization, and then we, of course, got some others with Stillwater, Meadows, and the Permian Basin Area Foundation threw in as well and helped us out through the entire process. And we have a tangible result we're very proud of. So that's it. What time?
Let's open it up for questions. We're talking about partnerships and possibilities, collaborative conservation and opportunities. So any questions from the crowd? We have our runner, Alex. She put on her tennis shoes. Hearing none, let me just say a couple final words real quick. It's been a great day. I know we started off, you know, getting stuck in the gate a little bit with some technology. We've had some incredible speakers today, some great panels. Really appreciate all them, and I'm going to clap on the podium, and if y'all would join me, please clap for everybody. Definitely the central theme here is balance, right? That was a recurring statement from a lot of different people coming to industry with solutions. Faye, I'm going to give you credit for that. There's just a lot of great sound bites. I've got notes and notes and notes about all the things that I've learned in this process. But the bottom line is there's a lot of resources out there. From the corporate side or landowner side, we have a slew of parks and wildlife biologists over here. We have NRCS people, we have BEG, we've got the Center, we've got West Texas Native Seeds. We have a lot of people that have the same interests as you, and that's doing good things on the landscape. It's not about stopping energy, it's about using energy appropriately and placing it in the right place to minimize impact. And these are tangible goals. When Joe left, I had to get him an Uber because somebody stole his phone when he was in a foreign country. He talked about, we had some great examples of mitigation strategies. But really the best thing that we can do is to plan. And that's probably the hardest thing for us to do in the energy industry, where it's really a feeding frenzy for a lot of times, is to thoughtfully think through how we're going to do it. And that's where I think the resource specialists that are here in the room might be able to help with some of that. Not making the decisions, but providing technical guidance through that process. So again, finding balance. And right now, I'd like to balance a drink in my hand. And so with that, I'm going to wrap this thing up, and where are we going? Okay, we're going back where we had lunch. So thank y'all again for coming, and be safe. Come socialize. If you haven't met somebody that you want to meet, this is your chance. So please join us. Thank you again.